Good. So it's a pleasure to have Stowe with us again, a dear friend of Reboot, and very much looking forward to flow in context of the web. So take it away and give Stowe a big hand here to get started in the morning.
Well, it's wonderful to be back. Maybe it's partly because I wrote a couple of things last year about how Reboot was the best single thing I did last year. And I think I could start making money buying tickets and kiting them, considering how many people wanted to come to Reboot this year and couldn't get in. We'll see if that takes off. So one of the terms I think we're hearing a lot at this conference is the word flow, and it's being used in a lot of different ways. And just to confuse you, I'm going to use it in yet a different way. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's all right that we have a term that is getting stretched in 100 different directions, and then people are trying to use it in a number of different ways. Maybe they're complementary, maybe they aren't. It's very fuzzy, it's very messy. But I don't think that's a problem. On the other hand, I think that the thing I'm going to talk about today, which is flow as a notion of a new kind of consciousness that's evolving in us, is very complementary to the other ways that I've heard flow be used. In particular, yesterday morning, the opening speaker, whose name I've completely forgotten because I've been focused on this talk actually, talked about Civilization 2.0 and new things that we have to do. He talked about the flow of materials through us, the 1.5 tons of atoms that we pass through ourselves every year. And that's very complementary to what I'm talking about, actually. So let me jump in here. Me. You don't need to know about me, but I do write a blog called Message. If you really want to find it, just type in Stowe.com. That's what you get. My little tag cloud, a new thing I do whenever I write something, obviously. And I want to start with apologies. Because of blogging, I don't really give talks or write anymore with a defined beginning, middle, end. I don't say, here's my thesis and here's a bunch of supporting arguments. Here's the answer. There's no pretty box with a bow. I leave a lot of difficult, work to the other people, the readers or the people sitting here. I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to talk about this. But it's full of sort of fragmentary thinking and incomplete thinking, but I think incompleteness is sort of a given in the new rhetoric that is evolving around what we're doing on the web. So, what is human? The aspect of that question that I really want to focus on is really the outcome of thinking about this question or this statement that was actually made in the 60s by a guy named Kenneth Bolden, who's not particularly well known. But he stated that we make our tools and they shape us. So we have these really phenomenally interesting tools, the web, maybe Web 2.0 kind of things, and the things that are emerging on top of that, the froth on top of the web, maybe the start of yet another kind of web. And they're having a decided impact on how we perceive the world, what we think about, how we make sense of what's going on. They are having a real impact. And I think it was Danny. Danny, are you here somewhere? She and I were talking about this yesterday. She said, well, this is really a cycle. This is not just a one-time thing. We're making tools, they shape us, we change, we write new tools. And that cycle of change is very quick right now. There's a huge amount of innovation. We're building very interesting tools, and I don't even have to go into details, All the interesting social apps, social presence apps, social networking apps, and the like. So I suggest that we're moving to a new kind of consciousness. Now, consciousness, not in the sense that we're throwing away what we have prior to this, but we're building on top of it. We're making more on top of the mess we already have. And it's not going to clear up the problems we have with human consciousness, and it's not going to necessarily be a brand new renaissance, but we're going to change anyway. And we're going to be very different. So how are we changing based on the way we're using our brains today? And how are our brains changing based on the tools that we're trying to use to understand the world and our place in it? What are we losing that we had before? Some of it good, some of it bad. And what do we gain? Some of it good, some of it bad. That's what I really want to talk about today. And in particular, I'm interested in how we're changing the notion of sociality, the way that we interact with each other, and the scope of our interactions with other people. One of my theories is that with these tools, we're actually able to extend our ability to be social. We can be social to a new depth and a new breadth of involvement. And starting with the end in mind, I want to tell you where I think I'm going to wind up. I believe there is a new consciousness evolving, and it's different enough that it's going to cause trouble. It's not so different that it's like a science fiction novel and all of a sudden we're going to ascend to a level we don't use language or something like that. But it's different enough that a lot of people are going to say it's bad, and that those people that are participating in it are in some way doing something that's illegitimate. And so apropos of some of the conversations yesterday, we can expect that the powers that be will wag their fingers at us and tell us we're doing something evil, that this is immoral to some extent. And part of this is that we're developing a new moral sense, where part of this consciousness inevitably means you value certain things more highly and certain things less highly than we did before. To some extent, you could, if you were being a negativist about this, you could say this is kind of like, we're evolving this kind of hive mind where people are constantly in touch, sniffing each other's pheromones all day long. And maybe that's right to some extent. I think it was yesterday the first speaker said, intelligence isn't the only thing that's important. Emotionality is really important too. So even though I don't drill into that in particular here, the sense of belonging that comes from being involved in other people is a very strong attribute of what I'm thinking about here. So I want to start with what it's like and what it isn't like. And I'm going to do something that is sort of, I guess, my character anyways. I'm going to start by talking about what the naysayers are saying about these kinds of things and trying to debunk their arguments. But I want to start with the juggler's paradox, to share with you a small kind of consciousness shift as an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. How many people here juggle? So juggling is defined by cascading at least 3 balls at least 100 times. How many people now really are jugglers? Because 100 times is a lot. Well, it's a very small number, and that's not surprising, because it is hard to learn to juggle. And how do you learn to juggle? Any one of the people that put their hand up want to say how you learn to juggle? Think about it, then forget it, and then simply do it. Well, I go with the simply do it thing. To learn to juggle, you have to throw the ball in the air a lot of times, and it falls to the ground. And you pick it up and you try again, and after a while, you train your neurons to do something that you wouldn't be able to do before. It actually just requires a lot of practice, right? There's a lot of practice involved. And the interesting thing is, jugglers know and sort of can tell people how they do it, but the way they describe it doesn't help somebody. You say, this is how juggling works, and they go, I don't even understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. That's really the reality. And the way they do it is sort of the opposite of our intuitive thought about juggling. They do not focus on the balls, and they do not focus on their movements. They're not saying, I'm watching this ball, I'm watching that ball, which is what a non-juggler might think. They unfocus. When you're juggling, you're not really looking at any of the balls or thinking about your movements at all. And really good jugglers can do a comedy routine while they're juggling. They can do something else at the same time. So it becomes a learned new state of consciousness that you can turn on and step into like a suit of clothes as a juggler anytime you want, unless you're drunk or something. So I'll make another example from the world of martial arts. When I started taking karate, I went to the class, the first class. I watched this guy who ultimately became my sensei. And I watched him, and I couldn't even see what he was doing. I closed my eyes afterwards, and I said, "What did he do?" I don't remember. I couldn't remember. Couldn't even put words on what he was doing. So in some places, you can't even see what's going on. It's like magic, because it's so different. And then the last comment about that is there's a joke, a thing I do in bars with people when we're talking about things like martial arts or attention or whatever. I hold up a dollar bill. Actually, I should do this. I hold up a dollar bill like this, and I put the other person's hand here, and I say, "I'll let go, you try to catch it," like that. Of course, it's my same brain, so it's easy for me to do this. But generally, I do this, and people go, "They can't do it. They can't do it." And it's not a function of attention. But if you do martial arts for 5 years, you catch it, because you've trained your neurons. It's not conscious. Your brain is different. You've learned to fire the neurons differently. And as a result, you can actually do something, a little simple thing, that you couldn't do before, because you're operating in a different state of consciousness. And it's a little small thing. You're not Spider-Man, but you can catch the dollar bill. So all of these things are based on new learning, new behaviors, a new mindset, a new perception of the world. I mean, now I have my black belt. When I see someone doing karate, I know the moves they're making. I can see it, as you might imagine. But it's just a matter of watching karate for 5 years, and you can see it. A lot of people have attacked the same sort of thing that I'm talking about from a very negative viewpoint. That is, they characterize the things that is happening to us as we've gotten involved in these kinds of new technologies in very negative ways. The classic Alan Toffler in Future Shock, saying that we're overstimulating ourselves with too much information today, and this is a kind of madness. We go crazy, literally. But I don't really believe we're going crazy. I don't think information overload is driving us nuts and that our society is insane. This is Beatlemania, by the way. Remember that? Ah, rock and roll, sax, ah. I think we're learning to accommodate, we're learning to cope with a new world, and it's actually positive. Another take on this are the people that talk about the attention economy as a scarcity model. Most famous quote, Herbert Simon, who says, with a wealth of information, we create a poverty of attention. And that led to a huge sort of business consulting wave. People like Tom Davenport and John Beck, who wrote a book called The Attention Economy. And they're basically, trying to take this economic metaphor and use it to describe what's going on in our cognition. And I just don't buy it. I don't believe the economic arguments. And I believe it's just another failed metaphor, another attempt to think about the way we think about the world and think about the way we interact using economic or industrial terms, and they just fall short. And I think the die-off of interest in the whole notion of the attention economy is a good example of that, because it doesn't actually do anything for you. It doesn't actually help you do something productive. It doesn't let you build, for example, interesting tools on the web. The interesting thing is, attention's interesting, but we really don't know very much about it. I actually did a bunch of research for this in the last couple of months, and attention doesn't reside in one place in your brain. It's not like the pineal gland or, a certain location. It's all over the place. It's probably, an emergent property of a bunch of stuff that goes on in your brain, and we basically don't really know what it is. They're doing all kinds of studies, but as a result, the conventional wisdom about attention is probably wrong. It's based on oversimplified models of what the brain is capable of doing, or what we do when we try to be attentive to things. And in particular, we should steer clear of advice from best-selling business authors telling us what we should do with our attention, or what happens if we don't apply it particularly well, or whatever. A side note of this, and a thing that has a big impact, is that we're we have witnessed a shift in the way we perceive media, the way we interact with media. We've moved from, in general, many media start as being rivalrous. That is, when you're involved in it, you do just that one thing. You don't do other things at the same time. But most media transition from being rivalrous to non-rivalrous. For example, and that's subject to who you are and how old you are. But when radio first came out, people used to turn on the radio show and they just sit there listening to it, right? And only later on did people start like having the radio on in the background and do something else at the same time. And that's the way people used to watch television. They just sit there watching the TV. Shh, shh, gun smoke is on, quiet. But now, you know, a lot of people have the TV on in the background all day long. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm opposed to television, but this is how people do it. They turn the TV on in the morning when they start making their coffee, and it's on all day long in the background. And they'll watch television while they're playing a video game or listen to music at the same time. I really can't understand that, but I'm old. It's a sign of age. And movies are now transitioning to that. That's why people talk in the movies, right? And if you're an old fogey, you get pissed off. Shut up, I'm watching a movie. But for other people, they want to talk. And in fact, I get in trouble all the time because I'll watch movies with friends, and I want to make wisecracks the whole time with some of my friends, and then others will say, shut up, we can't watch the movie. I said, well, we are watching the movie. I'm having a great time. And then lastly, flow media, the new kind of media we're using on the web where things are flowing all the time, things are coming to us. I'm not going to get into detail talking about the tools. That's not the point of this talk. But it is another kind of case where things that were once upon a time rivalrous, that you focused on just one thing at a time, now we're getting used to it. A decade has passed. Now we now work in a mode where we expect to have a bunch of different things going on all the time. I've got 6 IM windows open, I'm writing email, got a Skype call, I'm doing everything at once. And that's the way it's headed. That's the way we're all going to work in the future. Attention deficit disorder gets brought up a lot when people start talking about this mode of interaction through the web. They say, oh, that's just because you got ADD. You got an inability to focus, you're hyperactive. You probably took drugs when you're in elementary school. We're inventing this disease, right? I mean, this didn't exist 40 years ago. We got a whole generation where 20% of the males or more in elementary school, at least in the United States, are being diagnosed with ADD because they won't sit still. Well, maybe they shouldn't sit still. Let them the hell out. Let them go run around. We're tying our kids to an old linear model of education, an industrial era model of education, and they're moving back to this non-linear kind of mindset about the world. Maybe it's video games, television, the computers, whatever, and it just doesn't work anymore. I don't believe we're creating a toxic environment for our children. I just believe the school systems haven't snapped into the 21st century. They're still organized around like 1890 model of education. You know, sit with your table with your hands folded, you know, do your work individually, don't color outside the lines. Because of the whole ADD thing and the negative arguments associated with it, people like Linda Stone, who I like very much, but I completely disagree with her about her idea of continuous partial attention. In 2002, when she offered that term, she was suggesting that it was kind of a disorder for executives to try to go to a model where they're being attentive to a lot of different things at once instead of, you know, doing one thing at a time and so on. And in a series of talks she's given, she sort of built on that, saying that even if CPA is occasionally useful, in general it's a disorder. And I don't buy it. I believe that that kind of thinking is based on an old model of how you're supposed to deal with the world. You know, first in, first out. It's a kind of a way of a fair discipline for dealing with the information flow coming to you, the request for attention. But I don't believe flow is bad. It's just a different model. And even though people like Linda Stone will say continuous partial attention is really based on the notion of speeding things up, it's really not. It's really about slowing things down. It's about remaining connected to the world around you and not dropping the connections you have with people, keeping aware of what they're doing and answering their requests. My argument is we can't afford any longer to stay heads down on task for hour after hour when things might be happening in the world that are critical, or a request could come to you from someone who's important in your network, and you could help them make some progress on it. It's important for your network that the network as a whole makes progress. So first in, first out is great for like a supermarket when you're trying to check out with your groceries, but it's really bad in the emergency room. So there's a lot of contexts where it just doesn't work. And I believe that we're living in a world which is much more like the emergency room than a supermarket checkout line. We're reverting to a pre-industrial, pre-agricultural kind of consciousness where you have one eye on the horizon all the time, looking for the prey and the predators, while you're working at something on your lap, in this case, napping a flint for a spear, and all the time you're chatting with everybody else in your tribe, trying to keep track of who's doing what. And that's a completely different model. It's not like building pins in an industrial factory. It's like being part of a tribe on the savannah. So you're going to see a lot, as I call it, the war on flow. As this mindset, this set of ethics, this new kind of connectedness comes to the fore, we're going to hear all of these stories in all of the newspapers, on the TV shows. They're going to say it's a disease. It's as bad as those kids in Japan who get addicted to texting. Stamp this out. It's not a disease. Oh, by the way, this picture, I love this. This is the instant message Barbie. And she has a little tiny phone on her belt. I don't think you can see it. Or it's in her handbag there. And you have the big phone, and you can text her, and her little phone goes beep, beep, beep. I think it's cool as hell. It's just amazing. Pardon me? It really works. It really works. You say hi, and it says hi on the thing. It's like so small, only a little kid can read it, you know? What? It's instant messaging Barbie. I don't think it's around anymore, but I got the picture somewhere. So it's not a disease. This is a new ethos. This is a new set of beliefs, right? It runs counter to the current culture that we live in. It's a counterculture. They're going to hate us. I'm serious. Get ready for this. Fundamental idea, they don't like the idea of thinking of your time as a shared space. Your time is supposed to be for you to be productive, or your boss to tell you what to do, or the government to tell you what to do, whoever. But it's not. We believe that now, our time is not our own, and that's not negative. That's positive. So, psychologically, we're adapting to that. Implicitly, I mean, you might not explicitly have these thoughts in your head, but if you're part of this web culture, this is starting to be your psychology. And as I say, it conflicts with industrial norms. If you're going to measure your productivity just on a personal basis, this will seem silly to you. But if you say it's more important for your entire tribe to be making headway all the time, then it's more important for you to take that interrupt, answer the call from your friend who needs help, than it is to finish this thing by 2 o'clock that you're working on. The buddy list is the center of the universe. Absolutely. You can start a new religion and we all bow to the buddy list. I am made greater by the sum of my connections, and so are my connections. Without them, I am nothing. People are made people by their relationships with people. This is a generational kind of thought, though. The younger you are, the more likely you are to do 16 things at once and remain connected with everybody all the time. The older you are, the less you do it and less normal it seems. So, we're training our neurons. We don't know exactly what we're training them to do. Why is my phone dead? But they are getting trained. It's not as obvious as saying, I want to learn how to juggle, or I'm going to karate class. But we are training our neurons to think of the world in a different way. It happens even if you're not thinking about it consciously. It's just like other things. We have these centers in our brain that if you expose them to certain kind of stimuli, certain things happen. If you expose kids to language at a certain age, lots of language, they are incredibly smart. If you expose them to less language, they're less smart, and they'll do less well for their whole lives. we are exposing ourselves, and the younger you are, you're getting more of this exposure to these kind of stimuli. We are developing cognitive centers in our brain that weren't necessarily stimulated in that way in the past. And trust me, anybody can learn martial arts. You just go to the dojo, do what the sensei says, and you will change. You don't have to think about it consciously. It will happen. It's in you already. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So why do we call it flow? I mean, there's a lot of reasons for calling it flow. First of all, you know, the flow of water, the flow of the atoms through our body, that kind of stuff. But there's also the work of Csikszentmihalyi, I think that's how you pronounce it, but I'm not sure, who wrote about flow as a psychological condition. And it really does support pretty well my thesis, although actually he was interviewed not too long ago, I think it was in Wired magazine, about flow and the new web. And he was personally very opposed to the kinds of things I'm talking about. In other words, while he researched the notion of flow as a psychological state, he really believed that this kind of online world that he was perceiving really didn't align with it. But I don't agree with him, all right? And in other words, I agree with his research about what the flow state is in human life. But his understanding of the web is a little limited because he's not very computerific. So flow is the state of consciousness associated with peak experience and this notion of sort of effortless involvement. And I'll give the definition from Wikipedia. You're immersed, you're characterized by feeling energized and focused, full involvement, and success. It's a very uplifting experience, like a peak experience for people. And here's a bunch of the things. I'm not going to go into this because it's not really the point of my talk, but if you read these kind of things, it's interesting, you know, the notion that you can concentrate, but it's not hard to concentrate. You make decisions, but it doesn't seem hard to make them. Time slows down. Does everyone here think that time is constant? Don't you have the sense that time is ebbs and flows, right? Yeah, absolutely. A sense of control. The activity is intrinsically rewarding, and it's usually not a solitary activity. Like you're on a basketball team, and the sense of flow that you're working in harmony with all of your partners, and it's all working great. The zone. So a lot of things I'm talking to impact our notion of time. I think we're in a transitional aspect of that too. Part of this notion of flow is a different notion of how time works. So this could be a full talk in itself. I'm not going to do that, obviously. But we're moving away from this linear notion of industrial time, where time is in little chunks. Every 15-minute slot is equally valuable, and you can do the same amount of work in it or have the same amount of fun in it. But we all know in our hearts that's not true. We can't live in mystical time, at least most of us aren't that enlightened. But this flow, or what some people call lived time, is what we all perceive, which is that we're involved in experiencing the world. It sort of flows through us, and sometimes we're really happy, and sometimes we're incredibly bored. Sometimes time seems like it lasts forever. Sometimes things seem like it's moving real fast. If you're in the zone, time sort of seems to slow. You know, you can see the tennis ball. It's really, I get all the time in the world. So, let me talk about flow in the sense of what these apps are going to be doing for us, or how they work already. We're involved in this chat, this conversation with all the members of our tribe, and these things are managed by different media, and they're in some sense statically maintained up on those servers somewhere. But it's like Twitter. You try to talk to people about Twitter who haven't used it, and either they say, cool, it sounds interesting, I'll try it, or they go, I just don't get it. And my argument to them now is I don't even try to explain it. I say, just try it. If you're not willing to try it, I can't explain it to you. You have to be in the flow, not outside looking at it. You have to be experiencing it to understand. So social applications, we have an explosion. This is my business, actually, is working with companies building social applications. And I've been doing it for a long time, and for a long time I was starving, because it really was, I invented this term social tools back in '99, and 25% of the people who were getting my electronic newsletter at the time, when I wrote that term and put it in an issue, they wrote me back and said, you're crazy, stop sending me your stupid newsletter. I said, I must be onto something. But now it's amazing. Like every time I turn around, there's 5 more people that say, Stowe, we really like your advice about our app because it's social and it's got a network. It's everywhere. Because social networks are how we discover meaning, belonging, and insight about the world. And it's being built into everything. And so the flow of traffic, the kind of information that flows through those networks, I call that traffic. That's the primary thing, the dynamic that's driving all future social apps, is figuring out how to flow the right kind of things to people. So it's another meaning of the word flow, but complementary to the other. It's the exposure to these apps that do this, tools that will allow us to unfocus, that our field of attention can be spread across our networks of friends. A field of attention based on sociality, our relationships to other people. And at the same time, remain engaged in a bunch of activities that are going on in parallel. That is exactly what these tools are doing. I guess one of my more contentious arguments is that we might be pushing Dunbar's constant. We are potentially augmenting our consciousness in various ways through use and exposure, and it might be the case that we can extend our social span, that it might be that we're not limited to the old number of 150 people that we could really care about and remain engaged with. I mean, the evolution of language is the thing that allowed us to go from 8 or 12 in a chimpanzee troop to 150. And now we are stimulating different cognitive centers in our brain, and we're doing something else. And we have this new tool, not as fundamental as language is, but similar, a new kind of medium, a new way of remaining connected. And of course, yes, we need the apparatus to do it. We can't do it without the web, without these apps. But with those, maybe it's 300, maybe it's 1,000. I actually don't know. But I believe, personally, I'm engaged with more than 150 people closely that I care about, and I talk to them frequently. So maybe, I'll just put it as a maybe. We'll have to see. So what about flow in you, right? Time is a shared space. This is something for you to think about this. How do you use time? It's not that you're a prisoner of it. It's a way for you to remain connected to people. You're sharing something with them. My argument is that productivity is second to connectivity. And this is the real core challenge or conflict with industrial age thinking. Network productivity trumps personal productivity. It's more important for the tribe as a whole, all the people you care about, to get headway in the world than it is for you to personally meet your goal for today. It's a central ethic. Another sort of side effect is that if you start to rely on the network, the flow of traffic, is that you don't have to worry about reading every email, attending to every RSS feed. You can miss things. The network will help. Things will come by 5 times if it's important, right? So you don't have to be a slave to the flow of traffic. You can allow stuff to just go through you. Don't worry if you miss it. Your network won't miss it. So flow is a state of mind. We are moving into this state of mind. We are changing. And like other revolutionary state of mind changes, we talked about Galileo yesterday and how he had to recant in order to avoid being burned at the stake. This is potentially not as really as revolutionary as that, but it's going to be revolutionary enough that people are going to come after us. They're going to wave their hands, wag their fingers at people that are advocating this and saying it's good. And they're going to say those people are stupid and they don't know what they're talking about, and this is degrading the moral fiber of our country or whatever. Expect all of that. And the last thing is flow is a verb. This is an active thing, right? It's not a passive thing. You are part of it. You are the nodes in the network with 10,000 other people. And it's something that we're sharing actively. So